Welcome to White Space, the weekly show where we look at the news of the data center world. And yeah, this week some things have happened and we're going to talk about them. So, Peter, Google has made a very green announcement in the run-up to the climate change summit in Paris. So,
indeed,
what did they announce?
It's very green, and it's not just in the run-up. They kind of waited until it was actually underway, and they saved up a whole bunch of renewable energy contracts, so they could say that they had announced at the event 781 megawatts of renewable power.
Wow!
Yes, and that's. Most of that is wind with a little bit of solar in Chile, in the Atacama Desert. The wind energy is predominantly in the States. They've got 400 megawatts in Oklahoma and another 225 megawatts from elsewhere in the States. That's 3 separate suppliers. They've got another 76 megawatts of wind power from a Swedish power plant. And these, as I said, 80 megawatts from a plant in the Atacama Desert in Chile. All these are agreements that are going to go for 10, 20 years, and it's funding the construction predominantly and the sort of the setting up of these power plants.
Okay, so they're going to be built for Google but operated by utility companies.
Yep, and the power will go into the grid and will offset the actual power used by Google. Because wind power and solar power only operate when the wind's blowing or the sun's shining, and data centres use power all the time. So they always have to do these power purchase agreements, which are a kind of offset.
Okay, well, I mean, good job, Google, and I mean, let's hope there's going to be good news from the climate change summit.
Yeah, well, I'm planning to be there next week, so I shall see what I find out there.
Okay, I've got the news from the world of storage. So,
oh yes,
yeah.
How big is a hard drive now?
10 terabytes, and
we've had those before. We've had 10 terabytes before.
Exactly, and this is very interesting because this is the first more or less traditional 10 terabyte drive. So the ones that came before, I mean, this is Western Digital, and they already launched one in the summer. And that one, it was 10 terabytes, but it used something known as shingle magnetic recording. So when you record tracks on the platter, sort of like when you write them, they're pretty wide, but when you read them, you don't need a track this wide. So what they've done is they started to overlap data tracks on top of each other.
Like roof tiles.
Yes, exactly, shingles. And what that does is it allows to increase capacity, but the process of overlapping, writing and sort of erasing and rewriting data becomes very, very complicated because they overlap, because you need to do a lot of things at the same time, you know, like if you want to sort of write more data on it. So,
so if you're doing more writing, a shingle drive will be slower.
Yes. Exactly, especially if they're small writes. If there's like, they're very good for archiving, right? To sort of like write once, read never. But the performance suffers. The drive they launched this week is the first perpendicular magnetic recording drive, which means it's essentially, for all intents and purposes, the same as drives 10 years ago, except it is still
somewhat bigger.
Yeah, no, it is filled with helium. Helium is something Western Digital does, something Seagate has absolutely no interest in, and they've stated so repeatedly. And another thing about Seagate is it has promised a 10 terabyte drive before the end of the year and hasn't delivered yet. So they are running out of time.
Get ready or not.
And the last interesting thing about this, Flash is still leading by storage density. So you would think 10 terabytes is pretty huge, but you can get a 16 terabyte flash drive which fits in exactly the same amount of space. Oh. So if storage density is what you absolutely necessarily need to have, you know, if you're building, I don't know, a submarine, then there's not enough space. I presume submarines need storage, right? Moving on. Sales
and purchases.
Yes, mergers and acquisitions.
Yes, Virtus of London has bought a data centre near London in Slough, owned by Infinity. And this is a significant deal because although on the big scale of things they're both relatively local players, Infinity's data centre in Slough has been its flagship. It's the one that's got a lot of flexibility in it, so if you are so different customers can have different levels of power and PUE and cooling in their racks, and that's enabled it to get some nice deals like the UK academic network Janet to go in there. It's Vertus's first data centre in Slough, and although we've got these interesting customers in the data centre, there's still plenty of space. They say it's about 30% full. So, versus existing data centres are filling up quite nicely, this gives them a bit more space. Mm-hmm. But as I say, the other question, why would Infinity sell it?
Exactly. If it was anyone else, we would think, they're experiencing cash problems. Are they?
Who knows? The one thing I do know, one thing that the Vertus have said, more or less, is that using the resources from this, they can invest in their new flagship, which is the Here East facility on the media centre of the old Olympic Park in Stratford, East London. So it's repurposing a very central building. I mean, it's not Docklands, but it's close to Docklands in the old Olympic Park. I say old, 4 years, and it's potentially a very exciting thing, which will take resources to develop. So I think Infinity has decided to focus.
Speaking about connectivity, so there's this company called the Blue Sky Pacific Group. They're a subsidiary of Spanish telecommunications giant Amper. Mm-hmm. And they've contracted Alcatel-Lucent to build a new subsea cable across the Pacific, and it's going to connect Hawaii to New Zealand. It's going to branch out to places like Samoa and American Samoa and connect a lot of island nations that pretty much had no connectivity whatsoever. It's going to branch out into other cables as well, so it's going to become part of the single system going from New Zealand all the way to the other side of the world, to the US.
Right.
So, yeah.
Because there have been troubles in the internet connectivity to Australia because of troubles with the SeaMe-We cable, which we love because of its name. Max, the NSA may not need quite such big data centres in future. Is that the case?
Yes. So basically, NSA, this is some changes came into effect last week.
This is the government spy agency.
Yes, the US government spy agency will no longer have to store the metadata of all people in America. Instead, the metadata will be stored with telecoms providers like Verizon, and NSA will only get access to particular telephone records when they get a court order. So it's basically, instead of sort of mass bulk surveillance, although they obviously don't like the word, but that's essentially what it was, it will be more targeted, and the NSA will no longer have everything at the base. They will have to go to telecoms providers every single time. Mm-hmm. Does that change things? I mean, it's only the telephone records. I mean, I think what actually most people found distressing about this was the internet part, right? Projects like Prism, which tracked everything you do online, every website mm-hmm. you visit, everyone you've been in contact with. So that is still there. Mm-hmm. And actually, the US Freedom Act, which was supposed to put, safeguards and stops on NSA activity, it doesn't seem like it will be doing much.
And Max, you've been hearing about various announcements from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Are we allowed to call it that?
Yes, yeah, that is exactly how you're supposed to call it, and I think we're still trying to iron it out in the office.
Yes. We would never ever refer to it as HP Enterprise, would we? No, but
as of last week, no.
They've been in town in London, making various confusing and hard to sift out announcements about cloud.
Yes.
Is that right? Yes.
And a lot of it, I thought, because we've been looking through the keynotes, and a lot of it was about establishing HPE as a brand.
Sort of last week we heard how they've HP is now reselling Microsoft Azure as a sort of replacement to selling its own OpenStack-based Helium public cloud. They've now got a deal with NTT, which I haven't got to the bottom of yet.
Yeah. They will essentially resell NTT services in the US, only the US. But yeah, NTT is the largest telecommunications company in the world by revenue, so it makes sense. And I mean, I think if I read the signs correctly, HP wants to be a services company more than it wants to be like a hardware and telecoms company. So yeah, absolutely.
And does this use NTT's data centers?
Yes.
Right, because something HP doesn't have compared with IBM is a soft layer, a data center company as part of what it is.
Yes, absolutely. But what we've missed this week, and that we will talk a lot about, I can imagine, in the future, is synergy. So you've seen the pictures, right? It looks weird, it looks strange, and I mean, HP hasn't had a lot of luck selling strange things. I mean, Moonshot and Apollo. I
mean, HP is still redesigning computers. That's what they do, and we love them for it. We want to see more of this.
Yeah. And it's a shame about. I miss the old logo.
Okay, I think that's all for the week, isn't it? So
yes.
We'll see you next week with more news in the white space.
Bye.